Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch by interviewing authors, discussing their books, learning about the writing process, and even, on occasion, chatting live with a panel of authors to discuss topics relevant to both readers and writers. My guest today on the Online for Authors podcast is Thomas Kelso, author of the book Fractured. Dr. Kelso completed his residency in orthopedic surgery and served in the U.S. Navy for 9 years before entering civilian practice. He now writes thrillers based on current innovations in medicine and science and continues to practice orthopedic surgery in Brunswick County, North Carolina. In my book review, I stated that Fractured is a medical thriller that will have you on the edge of your seat the entire read. It features an orthopedic trauma surgeon, Mark Thurman, and a stem cell scientist, Claire Hodgson. The two have figured out how to grow bones and heal fractures in days. And their first patient, one who arrives in the ER, happens to be a former Navy SEAL sniper and a friend of Thurman. In fact, Thurman owes his life to John Bristow. Thurman's ties to Bristow and the SEALs, as well as his involvement as a trauma professional with the local police force, quickly entangles him and his colleague in a world of intrigue. Who tried to kill John Bristow and why? More importantly, will Thurman's breakthrough be able to save his friend's leg? And will Thurman be able to save his friend's life? This is beautifully written and deserves the awards it has won. Kelso has definitely captured me as a reader. Today on the Online for Authors podcast, I'm chatting with Thomas Kelso, author of Fractured. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you, Terry. Good to be here today.
I'm super excited to have you. Loved the book, but before we get into the book and how you wrote it and everything else, why don't you give everybody just a quick elevator speech? Like, what is this book about? What are they going to find when they open up the cover?
I guess we got to identify which book. Fractured? Is it?
Fractured. Yeah, we're talking about the first one, Fractured.
So Fractured is a book that I've always kind of wanted to write ever since I was a teenager. I thought I was going to write a novel. And as my career and my life progressed, I've always been drawn to thrillers. And I wanted to write a book like that was a combination of what Michael Crichton would write and Tom Clancy.
Okay.
So sort of the cutting edge scientific medical sort of edge that Michael Crichton brought to his work, and then the thriller aspect and the sort of military aspect that Tom Clancy sort of really set the bar for
right. Right.
And if I could combine those, that was my goal from the start, and that's kind of what Fractured is about. And Fractured is about Mark Thurman, who happens to be a surgeon, and he's an ex-military trauma surgeon who now is in civilian practice. And it takes place in North Carolina, so there's a lot of geography that readers and live near us would be familiar with. And he is in the ER one evening, and he's called. He's on call, and he's called to take care of a gunshot victim. And the guy's been in a pretty impressive gunfight. And Mark goes and realizes that this is a guy he served with, years ago when he was the orthopedic trauma surgeon for the SEAL teams. And that's sort of that's the inciting event, when he recognizes this patient, from the past who actually saved his life when he was on active duty. And so he feels a strong connection to this guy.
And now it's his turn to return the favor.
Yeah, he feels like, really, he's not just a regular doctor-patient relationship. This
right,
is
right. This is a little more. This is a little more.
He owes a debt,
right.
And he wants to repay it.
Well, I can say that first chapter had me drawn right in. I mean, immediately I was right there and had to know what was going on. So you did a really good job with that. They say that if you haven't captured your audience in the first couple of paragraphs, then, so you did a good job with that. You say that you like to read thrillers, and that's why you wrote them. Do you read any other genres, or are thrillers pretty much what you read?
No, not at all. I mean, I try to read widely. My second favorite genre, or pretty much a tie, really, is historical fiction. I love historical fiction.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and that's been the other type of book that I've always read. And then I read a lot of nonfiction as well, and but in some biographies and things of that nature, but mostly thriller or historical fiction is where I try to stay in those two lanes.
Those two lanes. Well, it's interesting. Before I started this podcast, I was pretty much historical fiction was mostly what I read, the occasional something else. And now that I am doing this and I'm reaching out to authors, I'm getting this wide range from, cozy mysteries to thrillers to, like I had a psychological thriller. I've read some fantasy, things that I wouldn't have said were really what I would enjoy. And I am loving just about everything I read. So I like the idea that I've been kind of pushed to read a little beyond the things that normally strike my attention. So,
Yeah, I mean,
and yeah, go
I'm the
ahead.
same way. Yeah, and
Yeah,
I love science fiction. I read
right.
mysteries, true crime, occasionally things like that.
Yeah,
It's great. And
it is.
I love Stephanie Plum and then Janet Ivanovich's stories.
Yes.
Those are
Yeah.
great.
Those are great. Those are great.
Uh-huh.
I noticed, so I was looking to see, it's like, yes, thriller, but Amazon actually, let me read this. It has you down as medical thriller, forensic thriller, military thriller, but then it also has you down as sci-fi and mystery. So where did the sci-fi come from?
First of all, the those those things do kind of bounce around the different
They
categories,
do. I know they do.
but but I would think it's because it's cutting edge medical technology,
Yeah.
and that's sort of a theme that runs through all of my books. I want to write a story that has a medical storyline, or some sort of high tech storyline running through the course of the story, and it is like near future. Like we're not quite there, but it's not. It's just over the horizon.
Right.
It's coming. We're gonna get there. A lot of the stuff that I talk about is actually being researched and developed as we speak. But so I think that's that's kind of the reason they would probably put it in that
Throwing that.
category.
So that was one of my questions that I wrote down, was that in this story we have a stem cell scientist and this Mark Thurman, and they've come up with this way to heal fractures like in days instead of weeks and months. And my question was going to be like, how close are we to that? Is that something that they're working on, and are we close to something like that?
It is. I mean, it's closer than you might think. Now you never know with the FDA when things are going to get
Yeah, that
approved.
well, yeah.
But the stem cell research has been a main avenue of biological research probably for the last decade and a half, maybe two. And the whole idea of stem cells are you have this one cell, this progenitor cell that really from which all other cells and tissues develop from. And that's
Right.
really, if you stop and think about it, when we are first conceived, we're one cell. And yet,
Exactly. Right.
certain genes get turned on as cells divide, and certain cells become heart cells and muscle cells and bone cells, and skin cells, and all that sort of thing. And so there's some sort of control mechanism that allows these genes to become expressed. And Claire Hodgson, who's the woman you alluded to, the female lead, who happens to be one of the world leaders in stem cell biology, and her area of specialty is in bones. So she has developed a way to take a stem cell and trick it into turning into an osteocyte or an osteoblast, a cell that makes bones. And she's also an expert in three-dimensional biological printing. So people may not realize, but you can take a printer, just like your inkjet, Hewlett Packard inkjet printer, and instead of loading the cartridge with ink, you can load it with cells, and it will print an object in 3 dimensions.
which
And
is
so
really cool. That is so cool to me.
and so my idea was if you took these two technologies and put them together, where you could, because you can take a calcium phosphate liquid solution and print bone, and they're doing that nowadays. But if you could combine it and put cells in it, that would then you can implant into a patient. You can get new bone formation very rapidly and heal a fracture much faster than what our
Right.
bodies can do right now. So that's one of the ideas that are in the book. And of course, Mark has his patient that he's trying to fix who happens to need this technology.
Right.
And so, and then of course, Mark and Claire develop a romantic interest, and that's kind of as part of the story too.
Right. And that was the other thing I was going to say is, you don't just deal with military thriller or just with medical thriller, but you throw in a little romance on the side too. So I think where does that come from? I'm just curious, like, do you see that in some of the other authors that do thrillers, or do you just like a good romance as well?
Well, it was inevitable with the characters, they sort of led the way. And I do like a little bit of romantic interest. Some of my readers were not happy with that, and others loved it. So but I wrote the story I wanted to write, and that's kind of the way I wanted to write it.
Well, Tom, you hit on something there that is 100% true. Some of your readers are going to like it and some of your readers aren't, and you just cannot please everyone. So you have to write the story that you want to write. That's 100% true.
No, that's totally right. And you can't get hung up in the reviews and all the criticisms, because you're never going to please everybody. You got to find your niche, your niche of readers that like your work, and hopefully they stick with you. That's kind of the idea.
Right. I thought that the romance part added a lot to it, because it gave it just a little more tension, especially, later in the book, there was a lot of tension, and the tension was there partially because Mark is dealing with this horrible situation, but partially because now he's involved someone that he's involved with, and it was like, there she is in the midst of all of this, and he's like, whoa, what have I done? So I thought it added a lot.
He's kind of a loner, and really is happy being like that, and then he meets this other person that he has a lot in common with, and they end up just sort of developing that kind of a special bond.
Yeah, and I like the way that it happened, because it's very obvious that it didn't happen overnight. That she's actually been like wondering, is he ever going to ask me out? And I just love that idea that he's kind of, he's this extremely intelligent loner kind of doctor who seems to have somehow missed all of the cues. he wasn't even really aware. It was like, oh, wait a minute, she's really that interested. So I loved that. It reminded me actually a little bit of my son, who we have a story about him and his wife that she almost gave up. She gave him so many clues that he didn't take that she assumed that he wasn't interested, and he was just didn't recognize them as clues. So that's always fun.
And Claire is really, well, first of all, she's the brains behind all the technology, but she's also very strong, and she's a no nonsense kind of woman, and she's the kind of woman that Mark can't help but respect, because she really is quite an impressive woman.
Absolutely. So you're an orthopedic surgeon.
Yeah.
And so is Mark Thurman, right? How much of you is in Mark?
Well, if I were like Mark, that would be great. I would love to be like Mark. But
so Mark is Tom as he wishes to be. Is that what it is?
I think he's got a lot of other characteristics that are not me. But in order to write that character authentically, I needed to, sort of have some of the life experiences that he has, and he's a surgeon, so I've spent my professional career in operating rooms. I know what that's like in emergency rooms. I spent 10 years in a level 1 trauma center where I worked before I moved to North Carolina. Prior to that, I was in the military as in U.S. Navy for 9 years, and the last 2 years before I left, I was actually assigned as the orthopedic surgeon for the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, which is commonly known as SEAL Team 6. And so I spent 2 years, sort of taking care of those guys, and I got some background.
Yeah.
Now I would just go out and see them in clinic. I didn't deploy with them or anything like that. So that's all made up as part of Mark's background. But that's kind of the idea there. So that's where
I was going to ask if there was any military background, because when I looked at your quick bio, and I didn't see that in there, and I thought, I'll bet there is, because a lot of times when someone has military background, they like bringing something into their stories. So yeah, that was it was very. It felt very real. It felt very much like the shows my husband watches on television. So
good. That'd be great. I wish I could get someone to pick it up as a show.
Oh yeah, I know. I say that all the time. In fact, I tell people all the time, Oprah, are you listening?
That's the holy grail right there.
Seriously.
Yeah, I was, because to go to before medical school, I was thought I was going to be a research scientist, and got my Ph.D. and just sort of realized I wasn't committed to doing research my whole career. I didn't want to spend a career in academics. And so I just took the MCATs, the Medical College Admissions Test, and then applied to some medical schools and got in. But my wife and we had no money at the time. My parents, couldn't afford to send me to medical school. They had 3 other kids to send to college. So I started looking around, and I realized that the Navy offered, or the military offers, what's called a healthcare professional scholarship, and I applied for that, and I got accepted. So they basically paid for me to go to medical school.
Right.
And so, but the deal is you owe them service afterwards. And so after I graduated, that's how I became a Navy orthopedic surgeon. I had to do all my payback.
Oh yeah. But then again, when you were done with that, you were really done with it. You don't have the student loans and all of the other things, and you were able to. And then you had some really great experience as well.
Right.
Because no debt and several years of experience under your belt when you go out into the civilian world. So yeah, that's great. What about Mark is significantly different from you?
Well, Mark is first of all, he's a cancer survivor, and I'm not that. And so that is what got him out of the military. He was really gung ho into staying in the military. He loved his job with the SEALs, and he comes down with this type of cancer called osteosarcoma, and that gets him what we call a medical board. And so you could basically get medically discharged from the military because you can't basically do the requirements of your job anymore. So Mark gets medically boarded out, has to go through 6 months of chemotherapy and radiation, and he goes into this really dark place as a result of all this. And that's way different than me. I don't have that. Mark's single. I'm not single. I've been married for 40 years. So those are kind of things. He played college at, he was a pitcher at the Wake Forest at Wake Forest. I never did anything like that. So he's a lot different than I am.
He is.
He's a lot smarter than I am too.
I don't know. I would say that you probably are. I mean, you figure you have both a doctorate degree in research and then went on and got your medical degree. I'm going to say that you're no slouch.
Well, I'm a grinder. I can study. I can study with the best of them. Let's put it that way.
All right. So you've gone on then to write more. So Fractured is like book 1 in your Mark Thurman series, and you've written 2 more. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. And so just for listeners, why don't you give a really quick synopsis of those 2 books and let us know whether or not you have to start with Fractured, or if you could start somewhere else in that series and still feel like you were getting everything you needed to know.
The second book in the series is called Hyperion's Fracture. And that book came about because, I was thinking about the technology that Mark and Claire developed. And I watched this HBO, movie about Barbaro. If you remember, Barbaro was the Kentucky Derby winner in 2006, racehorse, wins the Kentucky Derby, goes to the Preakness, and basically breaks from the stalls early at the starting gate, and they get him back, load him back into the starting blocks, and then they start the race, and he pulls up lame a couple hundred yards down the straightaway. It turns out he broke one of his legs, and the story of how they tried to save that horse is just heart-wrenching. You'll end up, I guarantee, if you look that, you can see it on YouTube if you look it up, and you will be crying at the end of it. But anyway, so I started thinking about, man, what if I could use that technology could have healed Barbara, and you could have saved it. And then I started realizing that there are literally, I don't know how many hundreds of racehorses that are euthanized every year because they break their legs.
They break it, right, and once it's broken, they're no longer good as a racehorse.
Well, they can't survive because you can't. Horses have to stand on four hoofs, and if they have broken a leg, they can't stand on that leg, and so they have to put them down. And that was the idea. That was sort of the idea that started. So Hyperion is the racehorse in the story, and he's in a qualifying event in Hot Springs, Arkansas, for the Kentucky Derby. And he gets in an accident with his arch rival, and ends up with a broken leg. And the owners know of Mark and Claire's technology, and they call them to ask them to save the horse. And that starts the story. There's another whole story line in it with shady pharmaceutical CEO and drug cartels and all this kind of crazy stuff. So, and this one takes you out of North Carolina into, South America and Central America, and even Churchill Downs, and so it's kind of a little bit wider, scope in terms of geographic location. You don't really have to read that book second to get to enjoy it. I think you understand the characters better if you start at first, but you don't have to.
Okay.
And the third book is called Stability Island, and I departed a little bit on the bone healing, framework in that story. Stability Island is about basically discovering new energy storage technology and different new ways to advance, electric vehicles and battery storage and stuff like that. And that's sort of the technological near future story.
The sci-fi part.
Right, exactly. And Mark and Claire isn't as big a player in that book, so she's in it, but she doesn't have a big role in it.
Okay. Well, because you're not doing any kind of, stem cell research in that one.
Right.
So do you have a fourth planned for this series?
I do. I haven't started writing that yet. I started writing the historical fiction that I wanted to write.
Oh, so let's talk about that. Let's hear about it. What are we writing, and when will we be able to see it?
So I've got a long ways to go, but the story, it takes place around early 1900s.
Mm-hmm.
And the heroine is a woman who wants to become a physician, and her father and her brother are physicians, and she wants to become one, and she's certainly capable of doing it. But if you look back into turn of the century, that was almost impossible. You could not go to medical school if you were a woman.
Right.
Yeah, and except in one particular exception, and that is Johns Hopkins. And they really started the whole process by which women were admitted to medical schools. And the reason they was only because of one woman, Mary Elizabeth Garrett, who happened to be the daughter of the CEO of the B&O Railroad in Baltimore. And her dad, John Work Garrett, passes on and leaves through a couple of different turn of events, but she ends up inheriting the bulk of his estate, $200 million, which in 1890 something is
that's crazy money. Yeah,
crazy. That's crazy money. She is the wealthiest woman, I think, in the country at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so Johns Hopkins has also made his money in the B&O Railroad, and he left. He didn't have anybody to leave his money to, but he left his money in a trust to build a university, a medical school, and a hospital. And so he builds the university first, they build the hospital second. Now they want to build the medical school, and there's a big financial crash. All the dividends that's how the money's going to the hospitals. The dividend payments are cut off from the stock, and so now there's no money to build the medical school. And Mary Elizabeth Garrett comes in and says, I will help you build your medical school. I'll give you the money you need on the condition that you allow women to be admitted on the same criteria as men. And of course, they balked. The board of trustees said, no.
That can't be right.
That's just not possible. But eventually, they caved.
Money always wins.
That's right. And so that's the way that Kate, Kate Cooper, so that's the name I sort of decided on from the character. She will get into medical school that way. But then guess what happens right after she graduates? So she gets in and she graduates around like 1915.
And
she
World
can't
War
work. Yeah, she can't work because who wants to go to a female doctor, a female surgeon, no less?
Right.
That would be unheard of. And so she can't build a practice. So World War I breaks out. She volunteers to be a military. Guess what? If you're a woman, you can't join the military. You can be a nurse, but you can't be a doctor.
Right.
So she goes to France, where they're happy to have you. And there are several examples of women physicians and surgeons that basically, build hospitals over there to take care of all the other interesting part of that is just learning about World War I. Unbelievable.
There's a lot of things, we focus a lot of our attention on World War II, and World War I is kind of that war that came before that one. And you don't know a lot about it. So I love that you're doing a World War I story, because there are not nearly as many of those out there.
Well, it's not as sexy. There's, you're not wearing really nice clothes or anything like that.
Right.
And, but the other thing is that there's a huge amount of medical technology that was developed in World War I that people didn't. There was no ambulance services back then. There was no, the whole concept of triage was developed in World War I. Madame Curie actually drove her X-ray machine around on the battlefield taking X-rays. Nobody had X-rays before that. Antibiotics weren't in existence. Nobody knew what a virus was. It was like,
were they blood typing? Did they start?
They just started. The very big. That's where people probably first started doing transfusions.
Yeah,
and that's the kind of stuff that is developed, and just an amazing amount of medical knowledge. But then, it literally was Armageddon. It literally was hell on earth to be a soldier on one of those battlefields. It's just like unbelievable.
Yeah, so that sounds like it's going to be a good one. And it would be a nice little fit with my latest, which talks about a granny woman in the 1890s. So this is a healer woman who's not a doctor, but does healing medicines, because in the mountains of North Carolina at that time, finding a doctor was nearly impossible. You had to go to one of the cities. If you didn't live in Asheville, there wasn't a doctor. So yeah, that's interesting. I like how it's the medical field that keeps coming back for you. So even in your historical fiction, it's the medical field that you went to.
Yeah, that's my niche. That's my comfort zone for writing. I feel like I can speak from authority there.
Right.
And it can write with, authenticity about what it would be like in an operating theater or something like that.
Right. Well, given what you know now, you can imagine what it would have been like without certain comforts, what would it have been like trying to operate in an area that didn't have, and then you start naming all of the tools that you use now. So yeah,
they didn't even understand basic hygiene. It was
I know.
God.
I know. And, you figure it was just in the 1890s, maybe just a little earlier than that they started understanding that washing your hands was important.
Yeah, that was
like
key.
Women used to die in childbirth because what they called a bed fever or something like that. And essentially what it was is the doctor would go from woman to woman and not wash his hands or his instruments in between.
That's right. They thought they liked that. They actually were proud of the blood on their coats. And
Yes.
the person that the guy that I forget what his nationality was, Czech or some, his name was Semmelweis, might have been Swiss. And he said he noticed that the babies that were born from the people that weren't rich enough to go to a hospital, the survival rate was like 5 times better than
Then the
if you went to the
hospitals.
hospital.
Right.
And so he's brought this up and said, "Look, if you guys are not washing your hands, and he was kicked out of the hospital.
He was ostracized.
And he
Yeah, it was
ended up committing suicide over it because
right.
no one believed him. It's a tragedy, but it's an incredible story.
It is an incredible story. So you have this idea for the historical fiction. You tell us there will be another Mark Thurman eventually, right?
Yeah, there's got to be. Yeah.
There's got to be. Okay, he says there's got to be.
There's actually a fair amount of demand amongst my small group of readers.
Okay. And then the other question I have is, do you have any other like just out there ideas? Or do you think this is it? You're going to stick with your historical fiction and Mark Thurman thrillers, or do you think you have something else in your head bouncing around?
I mean, I'm always thinking about when you're a writer, everything's fair. Everything's fair game.
Everything, yeah.
And yeah, I always have little things running around in my head, and I know, I feel like, well, I could develop a series with Kate and her family. That would be great. And just for instance, right now I'm going back and reading all James Clavell's book. I got hooked on the Shogun series on Hulu. Have you watched that?
No, I haven't.
Well, it's God, it's a great story. So watch it on Hulu. Shogun. James Clavell wrote the book in, I forget, 1975 or something like that. And then his next book is another book. He's got a whole entire series that takes place in Asia and spans from 1600 to 1980 or 90 or something like that. But great books, and he's a tremendous writer. I love Ken Follett's books. He's kind of one of the people that whose books I read just to kind of get an idea of his style and the way he tells a story. I think is great.
So when you're reading, I've got to know, because I know for me, but when you're reading, can you read for pleasure anymore, or are you also reading as an author, trying to take apart the book and figure out what makes it tick?
I can still enjoy a book. Don't get me wrong there.
No, I enjoy them.
But I will stop and think, man, that was a nice, great use of a word, great turn of a phrase. I love, when is this going to happen? We're far enough into the book. We need something to happen here. And
sometimes I'll be reading in a dialogue and I'll think, oh wow, why did I feel pulled out of that? What happened there that I didn't stay? Oh, it's probably this right here. So I'm doing that analyzing. It's very difficult for me to just get lost in a book. I used to get lost in a book. I became the character and I was just lost. And now I can get lost for a little while, but inevitably something will make my mind go, oh, I love the way that was done. Wow, that was a cool way of.
Or you take a little note. You really write.
I do.
Notes.
It's like, ooh, page 74.
That's right. Go back and look at this.
Go back and take a look. Right.
I do that too.
Yeah.
And I when I'm writing a book, I'll have a little notepad by my bed, because a lot of times, some of my best ideas occur, sort of in that just waking up or something. Early in the morning, and you're just kind of laying in bed, getting ready to get out. You'll be thinking about this, and you have to get up and I have to write it down or I'll forget it. It goes away.
Oh, that's what happens to me. I tend not to have that happen first thing in the morning. I have it happen when I'm walking on the beach. So I love to go take long walks on the beach. And usually the first half of the walk, my mind is just racing with my normal day-to-day stuff. But by the last half of the walk, I've kind of like calmed down and I feel like I've become almost part of my scenery, and I'm breathing with the waves. And then all of a sudden these thoughts just start coming to me. Well, you're out there. You can't carry a notebook that way. It's not, it's not a really good habitat for paper, right? So I have my phone and I just talk into, I have a recording app and I just talk into it. Now, when I get home, it doesn't always look right because the wind's been blowing in it and there's, but it's good enough. I can figure out what it was that I was thinking when I get done. So I understand that.
Then you go write it down. Yeah, that's what I do too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like if I'm driving somewhere and I have a great idea, or whenever I park, I'll stop and I'll speak it in there and I'll save it for later. Yeah.
Right. That's what I do. So, Tom, are you a pantser or are you a plotter?
I would love to be a plotter. All right. I want to be a plotter. I've tried to be a plotter. It just does not work for me. I cannot write.
Give me a high five, fellow pantser.
I can't write the stupid outline. It just destroys the whole creative process for me. Yeah. Takes the fun out of it. My brain works so much better when I'm just organically writing.
Yeah, that's the way I do. I used to say that I wish I was a plotter, and I don't anymore. I enjoy the way that I write, and I think that the books come out fine. And it's not that I never go back and think about plot structure. I just do it later. So I've written the book and now I go back and I say, I didn't get to something fast enough. I need to do something here that's, so I do go back and make the little fixes and things that, like, I need more information before I can get to this thing that's the big reveal in chapter 14. It's a big reveal, but it came out of nowhere. I need to add something back here. And so I do have to go back and make those adjustments. But I like that feeling of just the discovery. And I'm writing and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I know where I should do next. And then, I love that feeling. So,
and it's a great feeling. And you get this great idea for a scene now. Or dialogue comes out and it's so, real because your characters are actually like speaking it to you.
Yes.
Yes. So
oh, I love to hear that because I tell people that my characters speak to me and then I feel like I need to tell them that I don't need to be medicated.
Right.
It's like
when you're writing, it's like you're just recording it. You're just making a record of it while they're doing it.
Yeah.
But of course you go back and you change it a little bit because it doesn't always come out the way you want to, or it doesn't have the flow or the pacing that you want. The dialogue is all about, pacing and everything. And I love writing that as well. But like just the other day I was writing and I realized, all right, if I can write this scene like this and, go in the direction I've been trying to go. Before that, I couldn't really figure out the way I wanted to go with it. So it's really,
there's just something wonderful about that. In Daughters of Green Mountain Gap, I had come to a scene that I knew that this is what needed to happen next. I knew it, but I didn't want it to be what happened. I didn't like what was happening intellectually in my own brain. And it was like, oh, maybe I can come up with a different way for this to happen. And so for like 6 weeks, I was stalled on the book. I couldn't, nothing I wrote worked. Everything, I felt like my characters were standing in a line on the wall saying, no, we're not going to play the game until you write this scene. So I finally sat down and wrote the difficult scene and then put it away because it was like, oh, it just really took a lot out of me. It was a hard scene. The next morning I woke up and the rest of the book opened up. I knew how everything was going to tie together. I knew how everything was going to end. And I feel like my characters were literally standing over there going, I told you so. If you just listened to us 6 weeks ago,
What took you so long?
Yeah, seriously. We're not going to play your game, Terry. You're going to have to just do what we say. And yeah, so when people talk about writer's block, I think sometimes writer's block to me is one of two things. You either have too many other things going on in your life right now that you can't allow your creativity to be at the forefront, or you know what it is you're supposed to write and for some reason you are being resistant to it, and as long as you're resisting, you're just not going to be able to write. That's just all there is to it.
and I think I don't know if you have you ever read The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield?
I actually am reading it right now. I have it on my side table in the living room.
Get the audio version. He reads it to you, and I've listened to that probably 20 times.
Yeah.
His whole concept of resistance is just so perfect. And you have to overcome that resistance. And the writer's block to me is resistance winning the battle. He's
Yeah. Oh,
you
yeah.
you know and
I mean,
and
I had
you
writer's block for 6 weeks, but I knew what I needed to do.
but you kept at it, you persevered, and then you won.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
what counts.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. So tell me, if someone wanted to get up with you, Tom, and they said, "Oh, I just got to know more about Fractured, or the next two in that series, or I want to talk to them about this World War I book coming up," how do they get up with you?
Well, the best way is just to go to my website, which is www.thomaskelso.com. All
Okay.
space, and I mean no spaces, no capital letters,
Right.
all small case. So just my name, and then it gives you more information about all the books,
Mm-hmm.
and you can sign up for email, or you can communicate to me through email too on my
Super.
website.
Super. And yeah, I'll have that in the show notes. So for anyone that's listening, the other thing I want to say to anyone who's out there listening is if you've read Tom's book or you end up reading it because of this, review it.
Oh,
Right?
please do.
Go
That's
to
key.
Amazon and review it. And you can review it on Amazon even if you borrowed it from the library or a friend. You don't have to have bought it. Just go review that, because reviews are key, aren't they, Tom?
I mean, that is social proof for us. That is, a reader will be looking for a book, and if they happen to see that your book has enough positive reviews, they're much more likely to buy it, or at least check it out.
Right.
And
Right.
that's so important. I mean, it just if people would just do that, it would really help their favorite writers out a lot.
I know. I say that sometimes I feel like I'm begging on my hands and knees, because I know that people have read it. They've told me that they've read it. I ask them to review it. They say they will.
They
And
don't.
then you don't ever see the review. And it's like, oh, and I don't, no one's doing anything to be mean. They just go about their daily life and they don't think about it again. But those reviews mean a lot to authors. So by all means, do that. Right.
Yeah, nowadays you can you can leave a star rating too. I mean,
Right.
you don't have to write anything if you
You don't
don't
even
want
have to
to.
write anything. But if you do write something, the other thing that people assume is that they have to be like a wordsmith and they have to know exactly what to say. And you can actually put up in the title, "Good book," and then down in the bottom you can say, "I really enjoyed the book." Like, you don't even have to, it doesn't have to be
Some
wordy
elaborate
and elaborate and
description of the plot or anything like
no,
that.
and it doesn't have to be Instagram worthy or anything. It can just, I enjoyed the book, period. That's, so yeah, having those reviews is really important. Tom, is there anything else that you would like listeners to know about that I didn't ask you?
I don't know. I think we've covered about it, everything in terms of my writing life. I think that's great.
Well,
This is
wonderful.
I'm in my study here. This is where I do all my writing.
Is it?
You know,
Okay.
the
Okay.
books in the background change. As every once or twice a year, I have to go through, and some have to go and make room for new ones. There's only so much space,
There's only
and
so much space, and Tom's got a lot of research going on back there.
my wife will only let me keep so many books. She said, "We're
Yeah.
not going to fill up this house with books. So if you're not if they don't make the cut, we need to donate them to the library or something here."
All right. Well, Tom, I am so grateful that you came on to Online for Authors today. And yeah, good luck with everything. And let me know when the next books come out.
Yeah, here's just for all you folks that may not know. Let me get that. So
Yeah, there it is.
that's the
Fractured.
book. Go check out
Yep,
Fractured.
absolutely.
Appreciate it very much.
Thank you so much, Tom.
All right, Terry. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch. Tune in next Tuesday for another podcast episode.